In the heart of Nworie, a thriving town where red earth met the endless sky, a man's name commanded both awe and fear, Pastor Emmanuel. His church was not just a building, it was an empire. The structure rose higher than any other in the region, its glass windows shining so brightly that villagers claimed they reflected the sun itself. Every Sunday, thousands filled its hall, flooding in from nearby towns and villages, even crossing state borders, all to hear the man they called the prophet of our time. To the public, Emmanuel was the voice of God. He was a man who prayed down rain in seasons of drought, a man whose hands could make the paralytics walk, a man who claimed to have vision of heaven itself. Mothers carried their sick children to him, fathers entrusted their businesses into his prayers, politicians knelt before him, pressing fast envelopes into his palm in exchange for prophecies. But power, like fire, always had a hidden source, and behind Emmanuel's pulpit, behind his white robes, his booming voice, and the polished cross on his chest lay a truth so dark that even hell itself seemed startled. Emmanuel's rise was not born in the church. He had once been an ordinary man, a struggling trader in Onitsha markets, known for his debts more than his goods. His small store where he sold second-hand clothes barely survived each month. His wife Ada often skipped meals to feed their children, and Emmanuel's frustration grew like peace after rainfall. He had tried everything, trading, borrowing, begging, but poverty clung to him like a curse. It was during this time of despair that Emmanuel vanished for 7 days and 7 nights. He left no word for his wife, no sign for his friends. The market people assumed that he had fled from his creditors, but on the 8th morning, he returned, his eyes burning with a light no one recognized. His lips spoke words with a weight that bends the air. Within months, he announced that he had received a heavenly call. He abandoned his store, gathered a small group of followers under a mango tree, and began preaching. At first, people laughed. After all, what could a failed trader teach about salvation? But then miracles began. A barren woman conceived after his prayer. A blind man claimed to see again. A young boy swollen from strange illness rose from what seemed like brink of death. The crowd multiplied. Offerings flowed. Soon the mango tree became too small, replaced by a bamboo shelter, and later by the towering cathedral of glass and marble. Yet what no one knew was that Emmanuel's call had not come from heaven, but from a covenant sealed in whispers and blood. During his 7 days disappearance, Emmanuel had not gone to any mountain of prayer as the letter claimed. He had traveled deep into the forest of Ohum, guided by a man known only as Nworie the Wanderer. Nworie was a figure shrouded in misery, said to know the language of spirits, the path of shadows, and the price of power. There, beneath ancient trees older than memory, Emmanuel was taken into a cave lit only by burning skull. At its entrance sat an altar covered in red clothes, upon which lay objects no Christian man should touch. Bones, charms, and bowl filled the dark liquid. Nworie told him plainly, "Power is not given, power is taken. But to take it, you must give in return." And Emmanuel gave. He placed his palm upon the altar, and in that moment, a contract was bound. He swore loyalty to the forces that dwelled beneath the earth, forces that demanded secrecy and steady offerings of human despair. In return, they clothed him in influence, in charisma, in delusion of miracles that would make men bow before him. When Emmanuel returned, he was no longer the man his wife had married. He was something else, something hungrier. As the years passed, Emmanuel's church became the heart of Nworie. His sermon thundered with authority. His prayers shook the hall. People who entered broken swore they left whole. He preached against witches, against demons, against the forces of darkness, even as he secretly fed them with sacrifices. The offerings came in subtle ways. Women desperate for children were lured into special midnight prayers in his private chambers. Men seeking wealth were made to sign papers they never read, binding them into debts that fattened the church while draining their lives. And those who questioned too loudly, they disappeared. A young usher died in a car accident. A businessman who accused the pastor of fraud went mad overnight, tearing off his clothes in the market square. Each tragedy fed whispers, but Emmanuel always turned them into sermons. The devil fights the anointed, he would declare, his voice echoing as the congregation wept and threw money at the altar. His wife, Ada, knew more than she admitted. She had stumbled one night into his study and found a locked box beneath the floorboards. Inside were charms tied with red clothes, bottles of strange powders, and photographs of church members marked with symbols. When she confronted him, Emmanuel's smile was cold. "Will you rather be the wife of a poor man or the queen of a prophet?" he asked. Fear sealed her lips. She stayed, dressed in fine clothes, her silence purchased by wealth. But secrets, no matter how deeply buried, always find a way to the surface. It began with Nworie, a young choir member whose sister Amara had vanished after attending one of Emmanuel's private deliverance sessions. When weeks passed with no trace of Amara, Nworie grew restless. She begged her mother to believe her suspicions, but the woman, blinded by faith, told her not to blaspheme against God's anointed. Still, Nworie could not rest. One night, long after the church had emptied, she crept into the compound. She knew Emmanuel often stayed late in his office, but she had watched him leave earlier for a political meeting. With trembling hands, she slipped through the back door and began searching. Behind the heavy curtains of his office, she found a door hidden by wood paneling. With a push, it opened into a narrow staircase spiraling downstairs. The air grew colder, thicker as she descended. At the bottom lay a chamber no one had ever spoken of. What she saw froze her blood. The walls were painted with strange symbols. At the center stood an altar darkened by dried blood. On it were photographs, hundreds of them, of church members, some alive, some long dead, candles burned low, their wax dripping onto skull, arranged in a circle. And there in the shadows lay Amara's dress, torn and stained. But it was not just relics she found. In the farthest corner of the chamber were cages, iron bars, chained locks. Inside them, weak and trembling, were men and women from the congregation. Some had been missing for weeks, others for months. Their eyes were hollow, their voices broken, but they were alive. She stumbled backwards, nearly fainting. Then she heard footsteps above, the crack of someone returning. Emmanuel was already at the entrance, his face half hidden by the flicker of candlelight. His eyes, once warm in the pulpit, now glowed red. "You should not have seen this," he whispered. Panic surged through her veins. She turned and fled into the maze of tunnels. Emmanuel's footsteps closed behind. The walls seemed to close in. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the air grew heavier with every breath. But desperation lent her strength. She darted through narrow passages, clutching her closed stones for balance, until she burst through a rusted iron door that led outside into the night. She ran into the darkness, her lungs burning, her heart hammering, her body drenched in sweat. She did not stop until she reached her uncle's house on the far edge of town, where she collapsed, gasping out the story of what she had seen. By dawn, word spread like wildfire. Villagers armed with cutlasses, lanterns, and courage born of anger stormed the church. Emmanuel was nowhere to be found, but the chamber was real. They found the cages, and in them, the missing, thin, frightened and half-starved, but alive. Tears and wails filled the night as families reunited, though not all were fortunate. For every living soul freed, there were names that would never return. The discovery ripped through Nworie like a storm. The pastor who once claimed to be the light's had built his empire on shadows, and those shadows had finally been exposed. The story exploded the next morning. Nworie told what she had seen, and though many dismissed her as hysterical, enough people believed that to shake the foundation of the church. Journalists descended on Nworie, cameras flashing, headlines screaming. Police opened an investigation, but powerful politicians tied to Emmanuel by prophecy and prayer slowed the process. Yet the crack had already formed. Former members came forward speaking of disappearances, of deaths, of nights filled with strange rituals, and that his wife finally broke her silence, confirming the existence of a hidden chamber. The church that once overflowed now stood half empty. Donations dried up. Fear spread like wildfire. And Emmanuel, he did not repent. He stood on his pulpit one final Sunday, his voice still thunderous, his presence still commanding. "They want to bring me down," he roared, "but the prophets cannot be touched." But the people had already seen too much. The man they once worshipped as holy was unmasked as something darker than they could bear to imagine. The truth, whispered long after Emmanuel vanished from the public eye, was that his miracle had never been miracles. His power had never been divine. It had been bought in blood, sealed with oaths, fueled by fear. He had not fought demons, he had served them. Perhaps the most terrifying part was not that he had deceived people. It was that even after the truth came out, many still defended him. Even after evidence filled the air, some claimed it was all a lie. Insisting a man so anointed could never fall. For faith once bound is harder to break than chains. And so the story of Pastor Emmanuel became both a wonder and a tragedy, a tale of how darkness can wear the robe of light, how hunger for power can twist the soul, and how even the holiest voices may carry secrets too heavy for heaven to bear.